Okay, now let's see the other table that we have here, which will also have a composite primary key or a multiple primary key, which will be the customer balance. Now, as you are a bank, mostly at the end of the month, each of your customers will have a specific balance. Notice that we have here some months that are missing because there was no balance available or you couldn't get that information. And we have here the data for customer ID 1 and for customer ID 2 and even a new customer ID 3 that we didn't have in the customer month. Okay, this is on purpose because we'll do some exercise with this. But notice that now we have here several balances. For example, customer 1 had balance of 10 euros and then 15 euros. Customer 2 had 1,525 euros and then 225 euros in the next month. Now this is interesting because what happens if we try to cross or to join these tables only by the customer ID? Let's see that first. So I'm going to go for the following. Select a.customer ID, a.month, a.customer name. I think it's customer name. Let's check customer name exactly. And b.customer balance. And then from what? From the table sandbox.customer, what's the name? Customer underscore month as A. Then we can use, I'm going to use inner join sandbox.customer balance as B. And now on A.customer ID is equal to B.customer ID. Now let's see what this will yield. Oops, I had here two typos. B7 of course should be B and this column is called balance. Sorry about that. Let's now run this one. And there you go. Now something odd is happening. Notice we have, for example, customer ID 1 with the month repeated, 2019-03-03, John, and 2 times the balance that the customer had on March and on April, and that is repeated throughout the columns, right? Notice that both of the balances appear twice. Why? Because we are producing duplicates in this column. As we are only using the customer ID as connector, what will happen is that each time the row or the customer ID is on the table on the left will be repeated by the number of times of that information is on the table on the right. So if I go here, for example, we see here, as an example, we see here that the customer ID is repeated 6 times. Why is it repeated 6 times? Because here I have 3 times the customer ID for different months, and in a customer balance I have 2 times. So the information will always be repeated, in this case by the key number. So as I have 3 on the table on the left times 2 the table on the right, I'll have 6 times the result on the resulting query. And this happens because I have duplicated keys on my join. As I'm only using the customer ID as a key, and this is not the primary key of that table, this is not the identifier of that table, the join is basically multiplicating these rows because that's the number of times it will match this customer ID on the left with each customer ID on the right. So for each row that I have on the left, I'll repeat it 2 times because that's what's on the table on the right. That will create 6 rows with repeated information. Of course, this is not what we want to do. Let's just confirm how many times we should have on customer ID 2 just to go a bit deep into this concept. So we have 4 times the customer ID 2 on the table on the left, and on the table on the right we have 2 times. So that means that in the end table what we'll have is 8 times the customer ID 2. Let's confirm. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 times, just as I've said. And the information is of course repeated several times, and this is not what we want. Now this is where the multiple key joins really enter, because of course I don't want this. I just want to have the name of the customer for a single line, because the balances do not repeat themselves as they are repeated here. So the balance for 2019-3 was 10 euros, not 15 for John. So that doesn't make sense in terms of the information, because I'm repeating the rows as I'm not naming what's the composite key or the complex key that we are going to use. So we have to do some change here in our query. And that change is super easy. We just have to add another column to the join, because that's the primary key of that table. And in that case, I'm going to use an AND, because the AND will give me that I want to do a join by this column and by another column. In that case, I'm going to do a.month is equal to b.month. Now this is extremely cool, because as soon as I run this query, no more duplicated values. Now we have the right rows here. So we are doing, of course, an inner join. That's why we have few rows for May here because two of the rows for May weren't available in the other table, on the table of the balance. So in this case, that's what we have. We have 4 rows, but notice now that the balances are correct. And we also have the customer name for each customer. So that's what we wanted with this query, to augment our table, but without producing duplicates. This is one of the most common mistakes that people do when building data pipelines or using SQL to extract data and doing joins, is to build duplicates in your data. That will be extremely harmful for your analysis, because imagine if you wanted to evaluate the balance of this customer throughout the months, as you are a bank analyst or something like that, you would basically be multiplying the balance of these customers 3 times for some of them and 4 times for the other. So this would be extremely weird, because the customer would have more money than it is supposed to. Of course, that would be good for the customer, but not for the bank itself. Particularly in terms of analysis, it will be a mistake. So now that we've seen this, let's also test other thing. What if I do a left join? What will happen? Well, the left join works exactly the same. The difference is the months that don't have correspondence with the balance will be null, just like we've learned before with the left joins, where the information is carried, but it will be null where we can't find information on the table on the right, in this case, because we are doing a left join. Now, another thing is that sometimes we want to produce duplicates on purpose with these multiple key joins, or even without these multiple key joins, with a single key join. Let me explain this a bit better. Imagine that now we would only have this table that I'm going to create right here, which is this unique customer. Well, the name already spoils what we are going to see, but even so, let's see this table. And you will notice something interesting. So imagine if I just have a single customer or a single ID per customer. Now notice that this should be a primary key in this table. I didn't actually, I used primary key here. Now notice, I can also use this syntax for a single primary key, although people find it more easy to do that way on putting the argument on the column right in there, because you would avoid having an extra line. But even so, this is a primary key on this table, unique customer, where we just have 1, 2, 3. So the customers that we have on our database without being replicated per month. So this is not the month image that we've seen before. Normally you will also hear people speak about image when they are speaking about multiple rows. For example, an image per month means that we'll have multiple rows per customer per each month. Now, a cool thing is that we can also produce duplicates with this, because imagine that I would want for each of these customers check their balance throughout the months. In that case, I can do that join, so select a.customer ID. I hope you're now familiarized with this A and B that I'm using. Normally when I'm saying A, I'm referring the table on the left, and when I'm saying B, I'm referring the table on the right. That's also a common syntax that you'll see with code throughout the internet. So I'm going here, A customer ID, and then I'll just want to have, for example, B month and B dot balance. Oh, you might be wondering why this is blue, right? Why does month have a blue color? Because month is actually also a SQL table. I probably shouldn't name it in this way in the examples. I'm just naming it in this way so that it's a bit more straightforward, but it's a good practice not to name columns with names of SQL functions. That's why this is in blue, because it's a reserved word for SQL, and SQL just shows it blue because it recognizes this that this may be a function. Okay, so if I go from sandbox.uniqueCustomer, right? Now I'm doing an inner join with the sandbox.customer balance on a.customer ID is equal to b.customer ID. Super cool. Let's run this one. Oops, and of course the alias. I'm a bit sloppy today. Sorry about this. So there you go, the alias. Okay, now notice something. We are duplicating our customer IDs, but this information makes sense because on one of the columns we had a unique customer, and we are producing duplicates, of course, in our query, but even so, these duplicates don't cause any harm. Why aren't they causing any harm? Because the balance indeed is not being duplicated, and this happens because we don't have multiple keys in both of the tables. So we have unique keys in one of the table on the left, and we have multiple keys on the table on the right, but this makes sense in terms of what we are wanting to analyze in this table, right? Because we have month, because we are multiplying the customer by the table on the right, and this is totally okay. Okay, so this is completely normal. Don't worry about it. This is something that happens quite a lot, you wanting to do this. Just make sure that you know what is the number of times a specific key appears on the table on the left and how many times it appears on the table on the right, and never ever forget to check what's the result of your join, because sometimes you may think that you are doing the right join. You are producing duplicates, and that will lead to some confusion and error in your analysis. Believe me, this is one of the most common mistakes that people do when they are doing data analysis. Really important to understand the domains of the tables that you are working on and how they are behaving in the output. So that's it for joins for now. We've had here almost half an hour of explaining joins, inner, left, right, and these multiple key. Really important concepts for SQL developers and for data analysts. Now let's continue and see how we can append data one on top of the other. The union keyword that we'll check next. We'll explore that in the next lecture. I'll see you there.